when I walked into the bridal suite. The white wedding dress hung mockingly on the door while Jessica moaned his name against the marble vanity. I turned to my son Daniel in complete shock, and he just winked. "Stay calm, Mom. I know everything." The revenge starts in 5 minutes. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up to how we got here, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. And trust me, you're going to want to hear every delicious detail. 2 years ago, I buried my husband Tom after 31 years of marriage. The grief nearly killed me, but somehow I survived those dark months when even breathing felt like work. I was 54, alone for the first time in decades, and convinced that my romantic life was officially over. The dating apps felt like shopping for human leftovers, and most men my age seemed to think a dinner at Applebee's was the height of sophistication. Then I met Richard Coleman at a bookstore in downtown Portland. He was reading Hemingway, which should have been my first red flag. Any man who performs his literary preferences in public is usually compensating for something else. But he was handsome in that distinguished silver fox way, and when he struck up a conversation about the old man and the sea, I was charmed despite myself. Richard was 58, divorced, and claimed to be a financial consultant. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and had the kind of easy confidence that comes from never being told no. Our first date was at a wine bar where he ordered a bottle that cost more than my monthly cable bill. I was impressed, which was exactly what he was counting on. 3 months we dated. 3 months of fancy dinners, weekend trips to the coast, and me actually believing I'd found love again. He was attentive, romantic, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. He asked about my work as a paralegal, remembered details about my friends, and even brought flowers to Tom's grave when I took him there. The only weird thing was how interested he seemed in my finances. Not obviously gold digger interested, but he had a way of casually asking about Tom's life insurance, my retirement accounts, whether the house was paid off. I figured he was just being practical. We weren't getting any younger after all, and if things got serious, we'd need to know about each other's situations. I should have trusted my instincts when he started suggesting I meet his financial planning clients. But I was lonely, and loneliness makes you stupid in ways that would embarrass a teenager. The first time I met Jessica, Daniel's fiancée, she and Richard exchanged a look that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. I noticed it, filed it away, but told myself I was being paranoid. Jessica was 26, blonde, and had the kind of artificial perfection that comes from good genetics and better cosmetic work. She worked as a social media consultant, which, as far as I could tell, meant she took selfies for a living. Daniel was head over heels for her, had been since they met 8 months ago at some charity gala. He's always been too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. Gets that from his father. I'd raised him to be a good man, but good men are often the easiest to fool. The wedding was planned for November 15th at the Riverfront Manor, one of those venues that charges $5 grand just for the privilege of getting married near some imported Italian marble. Daniel insisted on paying for everything himself. He'd done well in software development. But the guest list kept growing as Jessica remembered distant relatives and college friends who simply had to be there. 2 weeks before the wedding, Richard started acting strange. He was distracted, checked his phone constantly, and kept finding excuses to drive by the wedding venue. When I asked him about it, he claimed he wanted everything to be perfect for our special day, which was sweet, except it wasn't our special day. It was Daniel's. Then came the bachelor party weekend. Richard volunteered to help organize it, which struck me as odd since he'd only met Daniel a handful of times. But Daniel was grateful for the help, and I was touched that my boyfriend wanted to bond with my son. They went to Vegas, came back Sunday night, and something had changed. Daniel seemed quieter, more thoughtful. When I asked him about the trip, he just smiled and said they'd had some very interesting conversations. That's when I started getting the feeling that I was the only person who didn't know what was really going on. You know that feeling when everyone stops talking as soon as you walk into a room? It was like that, except it was my own life. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Richard had stayed at his place the night before. He said it was bad luck to see the mother of the groom before the wedding, which wasn't a thing. But whatever. I got to the venue early to help with last-minute details. Jessica was nowhere to be found, which wasn't unusual since she'd been dramatically stressed about everything from the flower arrangements to the font on the place cards. Daniel was calm, almost eerily so, greeting guests and checking on arrangements with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for debugging code. "You seem different today," I told him during a quiet moment. "Do I?" He smiled, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not innocence. Daniel had lost that years ago. This was something harder, more calculating. "I guess I'm just ready to start the next chapter of my life." That's when Mrs. Patterson, the wedding coordinator, came rushing over with a crisis. The flowers for the bridal bouquet were wrong, white roses instead of ivory. And could someone please go check on the bride because she wasn't answering her door, and we needed to fix this immediately before the ceremony started. I volunteered to go talk to Jessica. The bridal suite was on the second floor of the manor, down a hallway lined with oil paintings of dead rich people. I knocked on the door, called her name, got no answer. The door was unlocked, so I walked in, probably to find her having a last-minute panic attack. Instead, I found my boyfriend of 3 months with his pants around his ankles, giving my future daughter-in-law what appeared to be a very enthusiastic pre-wedding celebration against the antique vanity where her makeup was supposed to go. They didn't see me immediately. Richard was too busy grunting like a farm animal, and Jessica was too busy gasping encouragement. I stood there for exactly 5 seconds, watching my romantic future explode like a firecracker in a toilet bowl. That's when Richard looked up, made direct eye contact with me, and had the absolute audacity to wink. Not an embarrassed, "oh shit, we're caught" wink. A confident, almost pleased, "yes, you're seeing this correctly" wink. That's when I knew this wasn't an accidental moment of passion. This was something else entirely. I backed out of the room quietly, my mind racing. My first instinct was to march downstairs and announce to the entire wedding party that the bride was currently getting plowed by someone who wasn't the groom. My second instinct was to find Daniel and break his heart with the truth. But something made me hesitate. Daniel's weird calmness, his comment about being ready for the next chapter, the way he'd smiled when he said it. I found him in the main hall, straightening his tie and checking his watch like a man with someplace important to be. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I need to tell you something about Jessica and Richard." That's when he turned to me with that same strange smile and said the words that changed everything. "Stay calm, Mom. I know everything. The revenge starts in 5 minutes." "What do you mean you know everything?" I whispered, grabbing Daniel's arm like a drowning woman clutching a life preserver. My son checked his Rolex, a gift from Jessica supposedly, and his grin was pure predator. "I mean, I've known about their little affair since Vegas. I also know Richard's not actually a financial consultant, Jessica's not actually 26, and this whole wedding is about to become the most expensive reality check these two have ever received." I stared at my son like he'd grown a second head. This wasn't the Daniel I'd raised, the sweet boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a bug. This was someone harder, colder, and frankly, a little scary. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask. "About them? 2 weeks? About everything else?" He straightened his cufflinks with the casual precision of a man defusing a bomb. "Well, that's a longer story. But the short version is that your boyfriend has been running a very elaborate con, Mom, and you weren't the only target." Before I could process that information, the wedding coordinator appeared with her clipboard and panic-stricken expression. "Daniel, we're ready to start seating guests. But I still can't find Jessica, and there's some issue with the flowers and—" "Mrs. Patterson," Daniel interrupted smoothly, "could you please ask the photographer to make sure he gets good shots of the bridal suite? I have a feeling we're going to want excellent documentation of everything that happens today." The coordinator looked confused but nodded and hurried off. I was still trying to wrap my head around this new version of my son. "Daniel, what exactly is happening here?" "Justice," he said simply. "But first, we need to get you away from the blast zone. Mom, in about 3 minutes, Richard is going to come downstairs looking very satisfied with himself. Jessica will follow about a minute later, probably checking her makeup and acting like she was just having bride nerves. They think they're being clever. And what are you going to do?" Daniel's smile was absolutely chilling. "I'm going to let them think they won." The guests were starting to take their seats. I recognized faces from Daniel's work. Some of my neighbors, Tom's brother Mike and his wife Susan. Richard's side of the church was notably sparse. He'd claimed most of his family lived far away and couldn't make it. Now I was wondering if they existed at all. "Mom," Daniel said gently, taking my hands in his, "I need you to trust me for the next hour. I know this is a lot to process, but Richard made one crucial mistake when he decided to target our family." "What mistake was that?" "He underestimated how much I loved my mother." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever anger I'd been feeling toward Daniel for keeping secrets evaporated immediately. This was my boy, my protective, brilliant boy, and he'd been planning something to protect me. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad," he admitted. "Richard's been running marriage cons for years. Targets widows, builds relationships, gets access to their finances, then finds reasons to disappear with whatever he can steal. You weren't supposed to be a long-term thing, Mom. You were supposed to be a quick score." The revelation hit me like ice water. Every romantic moment, every thoughtful gesture, every time he'd made me feel like maybe I deserved love again, all of it had been a lie designed to separate me from my money. "How much did he steal?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "That's the thing," Daniel said, and his grin returned. "He didn't get the chance." Before I could ask what he meant, Richard appeared at the bottom of the staircase, looking exactly as smug as Daniel had predicted. He'd fixed his hair, straightened his tie, and wore the expression of a man who thought he was getting away with something. He spotted me across the room and walked over with that familiar, confident stride, the same one that had charmed me in the bookstore 3 months ago. "Maggie, sweetheart," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek like he hadn't just been inside another woman 5 minutes earlier. "You look beautiful, almost as beautiful as the bride, I'm sure." I wanted to slap him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you, Richard. You seem very energized today." "Wedding days are exciting," he replied, completely missing my tone. "I was just checking on Jessica, making sure she was ready. Pre-wedding jitters. You know how it is." "I'm sure you were very helpful," I said sweetly. Daniel appeared beside us, and I watched Richard's face carefully for any sign of guilt or nervousness. There was none. This man was a professional. "Richard," Daniel said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "Thank you for everything you've done to help make today special. I really can't thank you enough." "Of course, son," Richard replied, and the casual use of that word made my skin crawl. "Family helps family." "Exactly," Daniel agreed. "Family helps family." There was something in the way he said it that made Richard's smile falter for just a moment. But then Jessica appeared at the top of the staircase, looking radiant in her white dress, and everyone's attention shifted to her. She descended the stairs like she was floating, every inch the blushing bride. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was flawless, and if you didn't know she'd been horizontal 10 minutes earlier, you'd think she was the picture of innocent beauty. "Oh my God," she gushed as she reached us. "I'm so nervous I can barely breathe. Richard, thank you so much for talking me through my panic attack. I don't know what I would have done without you." Panic attack. That's what we were calling it. "Anything for family," Richard replied, and the way he and Jessica avoided looking directly at each other was almost artistic in its calculated casualness. "Well," Daniel said, checking his watch again, "I think it's time to get this show started." The next few minutes passed in a blur of wedding coordinator instructions, photographer positioning, and last-minute details. I found myself seated in the front row, watching my son prepare to marry a woman who'd been cheating on him with my boyfriend, while apparently everyone except me knew exactly what was happening. The music started. The officiant took his position. Daniel stood at the altar with his best man, looking calm and confident, and absolutely nothing like a man about to be publicly humiliated. Jessica began her walk down the aisle, and I had to admit she was stunning. The dress fit perfectly. Her smile was radiant, and she moved with the kind of graceful confidence that comes from knowing everyone is watching you. But as she got closer to the altar, I noticed something strange. Daniel wasn't looking at his bride with love or nervous excitement. He was looking at her like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. And that's when I realized whatever my son had planned, Jessica had no idea what was coming. The officiant began the ceremony with the traditional opening. "Something about dearly beloved and gathered here today. I tried to focus on the words, but all I could think about was Richard sitting 3 seats away from me, probably thinking about Jessica's body while pretending to watch my son get married. "If anyone has a reason these two should not be wed," the officiant intoned, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The church went silent. This is usually a formality, a dramatic pause before the happy couple exchanges vows. That's when Daniel raised his hand. "Actually," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "I have something to say." The entire church erupted in confused murmurs. Jessica's face went white as fresh snow, and I watched Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat. The officiant looked like he'd never encountered this situation in 20 years of weddings. "Daniel," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing buzz from the guests. "What are you doing?" My son reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a thick manila envelope. "I'm doing what I should have done 2 weeks ago, Jessica. I'm telling the truth." He turned to face the congregation, and his voice was calm, almost conversational. "2 weeks ago, I discovered that my fiancé has been having an affair with my mother's boyfriend. But that's not the interesting part." The church was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. "The interesting part," Daniel continued, opening the envelope, "is that this affair is actually part of an elaborate financial fraud scheme that targets widowed women. And Jessica isn't actually 26 years old." He pulled out a stack of documents and photographs. "Her real name is Jennifer Hayes. She's 32, she's been married twice before, and she works with Richard Coleman, whose real name is Robert Castellano, to identify and exploit vulnerable women who have recently lost their husbands." I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my sweet boy exposing a criminal conspiracy at his own wedding. But Daniel wasn't finished. "The way it works," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church, "is that Jennifer identifies targets through social media, obituaries, and public records. She finds women who have lost spouses and likely have life insurance payouts or inheritance money. Then Robert approaches them, builds a relationship, and gains access to their financial information." Richard was on his feet now, trying to edge toward the exit, but Daniel's best man, who I now realized was built like a linebacker, was blocking his path with what looked like a very friendly smile. "Meanwhile," Daniel continued, "Jennifer builds a relationship with the target's adult children, usually by dating them. This serves 2 purposes. It gives the team inside information about the family's financial situation, and it provides a backup plan if the primary relationship doesn't work out." Jessica tried to run. "I'll give her credit for that. She actually gathered up her wedding dress and made a break for the side door. Unfortunately for her, there were 2 men in dark suits waiting there who looked like they might be federal agents." "The end game," Daniel said, as Jessica was quietly escorted back to the altar, "varies depending on the situation. Sometimes they convince their targets to make large financial gifts or investments in fake businesses. Sometimes they forge documents to gain access to accounts. And sometimes," he looked directly at Richard, "they simply murder their targets and inherit everything legally as grieving boyfriends or new family members." The church was in complete chaos now. People were standing up, talking frantically, pulling out their phones. Through it all, Daniel stood calmly at the altar like he was giving a quarterly business report instead of destroying 2 people's lives. "The good news," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion, "is that my mother never actually gave Robert access to her finances, despite his repeated attempts to be helpful with her financial planning. And the better news is that the FBI has been investigating this operation for 6 months." That's when I noticed the men in suits weren't just blocking exits. They were moving through the crowd, showing badges, and speaking quietly to specific people. This wasn't just a wedding revelation. This was a federal arrest operation. "How?" Jessica screamed, all pretense of bridal innocence gone. "How did you know?" Daniel smiled that cold smile again. "Because you made the same mistake Robert did. You underestimated your target." He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I've been recording every conversation we've had for the past month, including the one where you told Robert that my mother was worth more than you originally thought, and you should probably speed up the timeline." The blood drained from Jessica's face. "You're lying." "I have 12 hours of recordings," Daniel said. My personal favorite is the one from last Tuesday where you discuss the best way to stage a household accident. Very creative, by the way. The carbon monoxide idea was particularly clever. That's when I realized just how much danger I'd been in. These people hadn't just been planning to steal from me. They'd been planning to kill me. The FBI agents were closer now, moving with the kind of calm efficiency that suggested this was a well-rehearsed operation. Richard was still trying to talk his way out of the church, but his charming smile had zero effect on the linebacker blocking his way. "The other thing you might find interesting," Daniel said, addressing the crowd like he was hosting a dinner party, "is that this isn't their first rodeo. Robert and Jennifer have been running this scam for at least 5 years. The FBI believes they're responsible for at least 3 suspicious deaths and approximately $2 million in theft." An elderly woman in the third row gasped and pointed at Richard. "That's the man who was dating my sister before she died in that car accident." The crowd turned to look at her, and suddenly several other people were murmuring recognition. Richard had apparently been busy in the Pacific Northwest. "Mrs. Morrison," Daniel said gently, "if you could please speak with Agent Chen over there. I think the FBI would be very interested in your sister's case." Agent Chen, a small Asian woman in a navy suit, was already making her way toward Mrs. Morrison. This operation had been planned with military precision. "Daniel," I said, finally finding my voice, "how long have you known? About the con?" "Since Vegas. Richard got drunk the second night and started bragging about his business model. He thought he was impressing me with his entrepreneurial spirit." Jessica made one last desperate play. "This is all lies," she screamed. "I love Daniel. I would never hurt anyone. This is all a misunderstanding." Daniel reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small recording device. "Would you like to hear the conversation where you and Robert discussed the best time to murder my mother? Because I have that one too." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crying babies in the back pews had gone quiet. That's when Agent Chen stepped forward with handcuffs and said the words that made this whole surreal experience feel real. "Jennifer Hayes and Robert Castellano, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and suspicion of murder." The next 10 minutes were a blur of Miranda rights, handcuffs, and very unhappy wedding guests. I sat in my front row seat watching my son's fake wedding turn into a federal crime scene, and all I could think was that I'd raised one hell of a smart boy. As the agents led Richard past my row, he stopped and looked at me with pure hatred. "You stupid bitch," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've cost me." "Actually," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, "I think I cost you about 25 to life. And for the record, the sex wasn't that good anyway." Agent Chen overheard that exchange and smiled as she guided Richard toward the exit. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come in for a statement, but I want you to know that your son probably saved your life today." As the church slowly emptied and the fake bride and groom were driven away in federal vehicles, Daniel came over and sat beside me in the front pew. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, and I'm sorry you had to find out this way." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who had just orchestrated the takedown of 2 career criminals, and felt a surge of pride so strong it almost knocked me over. "How did you know to record everything?" Richard wasn't as careful as he thought when he drank. He told me enough that night in Vegas that I knew something was wrong. So I called the FBI when we got back, and they asked me to help gather evidence. "This whole month has been an act?" "The hardest month of my life," Daniel admitted. "Pretending to love someone who was planning to help murder my mother while documenting everything for a federal case. But it was worth it to keep you safe." I reached over and hugged my son, this man who had risked everything to protect me from people I'd trusted. But as we sat there in the empty church, surrounded by abandoned wedding flowers and FBI evidence tape, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. This had been too easy, too perfect. And that's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you won? This isn't over. Daniel," I whispered, showing him the message. "This isn't finished, is it?" My son's jaw tightened as he read the text. "No, Mom. This was just the opening move." Agent Chen appeared in our pew before I could ask what that meant. "Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss the next phase." "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid you're not going to like what I have to tell you." She slid into the pew behind us and pulled out a tablet. The operation we just concluded was targeting a larger network. Robert and Jennifer were middle management, not the bosses. My stomach dropped. There are more of them? We believe this organization has been operating for at least a decade across multiple states. They've perfected the art of elder fraud, and your case was going to be their biggest score yet. Agent Chen showed us a photo on her tablet, security camera footage of a well-dressed woman in her 60s entering what looked like a law office. This is Caroline Voss, and she's the one who sent you that text message. She's the person Robert and Jennifer reported to, and she's not happy that her operation just got exposed. What does she want? Daniel asked. Based on our intelligence, she wants to cut her losses and eliminate any witnesses who could implicate the broader network. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire. These people weren't just con artists. They were killers, and we just painted targets on our backs. How many people are we talking about? I asked. Minimum of 6 active operatives, possibly more. They've been responsible for at least 8 deaths that we can prove, probably more that we can't. The murders are staged as accidents, car crashes, home invasions, medical emergencies, always plausible, always tragic, always profitable. Daniel stood up abruptly and began pacing between the pews. You're telling me that exposing Robert and Jennifer wasn't the end of this. It was just making ourselves targets for their boss. I'm afraid so, Agent Chen confirmed. But we have a plan. She pulled up another screen on her tablet showing what looked like architectural drawings. Caroline Voss owns the estate outside of Portland that serves as the headquarters for this operation. Tomorrow night, she's hosting a meeting with her remaining operatives to discuss damage control and next steps. And you're going to be there. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Excuse me? Mrs. Thompson, we need someone inside that meeting. Someone Caroline trusts, someone she doesn't see as a threat. Someone exactly like a confused, grieving widow who just discovered her boyfriend was a criminal. Daniel's face went red. Absolutely not. There's no way my mother is going undercover with a group of murderers. Mr. Thompson, with respect, your mother is already a target. Caroline Voss will come after her whether she helps us or not. This way, she has federal protection and the chance to stop these people permanently. Agent Chen turned to me with the kind of direct eye contact that suggested she was about to ask me to do something incredibly dangerous. Mrs. Thompson, Caroline has already reached out through intermediaries. She wants to meet with you tomorrow night to apologize for Robert's behavior and make sure you understand there are no hard feelings. That's obviously a trap, Daniel said immediately. Of course it's a trap, Agent Chen agreed. But it's also an opportunity. Caroline needs to know how much you know and whether you're a threat to the rest of her operation. If she thinks you're just a confused victim who got lucky, she might let her guard down. I looked around the empty church, still decorated with flowers for a wedding that never happened, and tried to process the fact that my quiet life as a paralegal had somehow turned into an episode of Criminal Minds. What exactly would I have to do? Wear a wire, act confused and grateful that she's being so understanding, and keep her talking long enough for us to document the structure of her organization and get evidence of the murders. And if something goes wrong? Agent Chen paused, which was not reassuring. We'll have agents positioned around the property, but once you're inside the house, you'll be on your own for approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes with a woman who murders people for a living. 30 minutes with a woman who thinks you're a harmless victim who doesn't know anything useful. Daniel was shaking his head before Agent Chen finished talking. This is insane. You're asking a paralegal to go undercover with organized criminals. I'm asking a mother to help us catch the people who were planning to kill her, Agent Chen corrected. Mrs. Thompson, we have one shot at this. Caroline is spooked, and she's going to disappear after tomorrow night. If we don't get evidence then, she'll resurface somewhere else with a new identity and new victims. I thought about Mrs. Morrison, the elderly woman who'd recognized Richard from her sister's case. How many other families had been destroyed by these people? How many other women like me had trusted the wrong person and paid for it with their lives? What happens if I say no? Then Caroline Voss disappears. Her network stays operational, and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for them to decide you're too much of a liability to live. The church had grown dark while we talked. The afternoon sun had set, and the only light came from the stained glass windows reflecting streetlights from outside. In a few hours, this had gone from my son's wedding day to a federal operation, and now I was being asked to risk my life to stop killers. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can go into witness protection, change our names, start over somewhere else, and let these people kill other women like me. That's not your responsibility." I looked at my son, this brave man who had risked everything to protect me, and realized that maybe it was time for me to be brave too. "Agent Chen," I said, "what exactly would this wire look like?" "Mrs. Thompson, please think about this carefully." "I've thought about it," I interrupted. "Richard and Jennifer weren't just going to rob me. They were going to kill me and make it look like an accident. How many other families are they going to destroy if we don't stop them?" Agent Chen nodded slowly. "The wire is nearly invisible, a small device attached to your clothing with a transmitter in your purse. You go in, have a conversation with Caroline, act grateful and confused, and leave. And if she gets suspicious, then you signal us, and we come in immediately." Daniel grabbed my hand. "Mom, these people are professional killers. They've been doing this for years. What if something goes wrong?" I squeezed his hand back. "Then at least I'll know I tried to stop them from hurting other families." The truth was, I was terrified, but I was also angry, furious at being manipulated, at having my grief exploited, at being seen as nothing more than a target. These people had taken my trust and twisted it into a weapon against me. "Agent Chen," I said, "I'll do it, but I want to know everything about this woman before I walk into her house." "Absolutely. We'll spend tomorrow preparing you, going over every detail of her operation, every person who might be there, every possible scenario." As we prepared to leave the church, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mom, are you sure about this? Really sure?" I looked around at the remnants of his fake wedding, thought about the months of lies I'd believed, the trust I'd given to people who were planning my death. "Danny," I said, using his childhood nickname, "your father always told me that the most dangerous person in any room is someone who looks harmless. Tomorrow night, Caroline Voss is going to learn that lesson the hard way." But as we walked out of the church together, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. This whole operation felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. And that's when I noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street during the entire ceremony was gone. Someone had been watching us, and now they knew exactly what we were planning. The FBI safe house looked like every suburban ranch home in America. Beige walls, generic furniture, and the kind of anonymous decoration you'd find in a mid-range hotel. Agent Chen had moved us there immediately after leaving the church, and now I was sitting at a kitchen table learning how to be a federal informant while Daniel paced like a caged animal. "The key," Agent Chen explained, "is to seem grateful but clueless. Caroline needs to believe that you have no idea how extensive this operation was, and that you're just relieved to have discovered Richard's deception before he could steal your money." She showed me photos on her tablet. Caroline Voss looked like someone's grandmother, with silver hair, kind eyes, and the sort of soft, matronly appearance that probably made her victims trust her instantly. "Don't let the appearance fool you," Agent Chen warned. "Caroline has been running con games since she was 16. She spent 10 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, got out in 2010, and immediately started building this network. She's brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely will not hesitate to kill you if she thinks you're a threat." "Wonderful," I muttered. "Any other encouraging details?" "She's paranoid about electronic surveillance, so her house is equipped with signal jammers. Once you're inside, we won't be able to communicate with you through the wire. It's only recording, not transmitting. We'll have to wait until you come out to hear what happened." Daniel stopped pacing. "Wait, what? I thought the whole point of the wire was so you could monitor the conversation in real time. The recording is for evidence. The real protection is the tracking device we'll place in Mrs. Thompson's jewelry. If something goes wrong, we'll know immediately and can move in." "How immediately?" I asked. 6 minutes from the time we detect a problem." 6 minutes. That sounded like a very long time to be alone with a professional killer who suspected I might be working with law enforcement. "What's Caroline's background?" I asked, trying to focus on details instead of the growing panic in my chest. Agent Chen flipped to a new screen. "Born Caroline Westwood in 1962 in Idaho. Father abandoned the family when she was 12. Mother died when she was 15. She was in foster care for a year before aging out of the system. First arrest was at 17 for credit card fraud. She's been doing this her whole life. Essentially, yes. She's smart enough to stay away from violent crime until recently, but the elder fraud operation is too profitable to operate without eliminating witnesses. She made the transition from theft to murder about 5 years ago. The photos Agent Chen showed me next were crime scene images, and I had to look away after the first one. An elderly man who'd supposedly fallen downstairs in his own home, except the angle of his injuries suggested he'd been pushed. A woman who died in a car accident, except her brake lines had been cut. "These are just the ones we can prove," Agent Chen said quietly. "We suspect there are at least a dozen more." I thought about how close I'd come to being another photograph in that file, another tragic accident that enriched Caroline's network. "What's the plan for tomorrow night?" "Caroline has invited you to dinner at her estate. You'll arrive at 7 p.m., have drinks and dinner, and hopefully she'll talk about the operation while trying to figure out how much you know." "How exactly did this invitation happen?" "I've never met this woman. She called you this morning while we were processing the arrests. You were obviously too overwhelmed to take the call, so we had it forwarded to us. She left a message saying she was a friend of Richard's and wanted to apologize in person for his behavior." Agent Chen showed me a transcript of the voicemail. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Caroline Voss. I'm a dear friend of Richard's, and I'm absolutely horrified by what happened at your son's wedding today. I had no idea Richard was involved in anything dishonest, and I feel partially responsible since I was the one who encouraged him to start dating again after his divorce. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening? I'd like to apologize in person and make sure you know that not everyone in Richard's life was aware of his activities." "It sounds reasonable," I admitted. "It's perfect," Daniel said bitterly. "She sounds like a concerned friend reaching out to a victim. Of course you'd want to meet with her." "That's exactly why it's so dangerous," Agent Chen agreed. "Caroline is a master manipulator. She knows exactly how to sound trustworthy." We spent the next 3 hours going over every detail of Caroline's estate, the layout of her house, the identities of people who might be there, and exactly what I should and shouldn't say during the conversation. "Remember," Agent Chen emphasized, "you're grateful that Richard's deception was discovered before he could steal from you. You're confused about how elaborate the operation was, but you don't understand the full scope. You have no idea that other people are involved, and you certainly don't know that the FBI has been investigating this network. What if she asks about the recording Daniel made? You knew Daniel was suspicious about Richard, but you had no idea he was gathering evidence for law enforcement. You thought he was just trying to protect you from a cheating boyfriend." By 10 p.m., my head was spinning with details, instructions, and contingency plans. Agent Chen finally called it a night, and Daniel and I were left alone in the safe house with 2 federal marshals standing guard outside. "I still think this is a terrible idea," Daniel said as we sat on the generic couch in the generic living room. "I know you do. What if something goes wrong? What if she figures out you're working with the FBI?" I looked at my son, this man who had orchestrated an elaborate FBI sting operation to protect me, and realized that somewhere along the way, our roles had reversed. He'd become the protector, and I'd become the person who needed protecting. "Danny, when your father was dying, he made me promise something." Daniel's expression softened. We rarely talked about Tom's final days. They'd been too painful, too private. "What did he promise?" "He made me promise that I wouldn't let anyone take advantage of me after he was gone. He was worried that I'd be vulnerable, that people would see a widow with life insurance money and try to exploit me. You kept that promise. You didn't give Richard access to your finances. Not because I was smart or careful, because you were watching out for me. But Tom also told me something else." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small leather journal, one of the few personal items I'd brought to the safe house. "He said that if someone ever did try to hurt our family, I shouldn't just protect myself. I should make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else." "Mom, these people were going to murder me, Danny. Not just rob me, murder me. And they've done it to other families, other women who trusted the wrong person." I opened Tom's journal to a page near the back, where he'd written about his final conversation with Daniel about protecting me. "Your father knew you'd take care of me, but he also knew that sometimes taking care of family means taking risks to protect other people's families too." Daniel read the page silently, and I saw his expression change as he processed his father's words. He would have wanted you to stop these people, Daniel said quietly. Yes, he would have. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both thinking about Tom and what he would have said about this situation. Finally, Daniel spoke. Okay, but I want to be closer than 6 minutes away if something goes wrong. Deal. That night, I lay in the safe house's guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. I'd never been brave. Tom had always been the adventurous one, the one willing to take risks. I'd been content to live quietly, work my paralegal job, raise Daniel, and stay safely in the background of my own life. But as I thought about Mrs. Morrison recognizing Richard from her sister's case, about the crime scene photos Agent Chen had shown me, about all the families that had been destroyed by Caroline's operation, I realized that maybe it was time to stop being content with safety. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Tomorrow night. Don't disappoint me. Caroline Voss was apparently not planning to wait until dinner to start playing games. I texted back, I'll be there. But as I typed those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far more dangerous than Agent Chen had prepared me for. The tracking device looked like an ordinary earring, but Agent Chen assured me it would allow them to locate me anywhere within a 50-mile radius. The recording device was even smaller, a tiny disc attached to the inside of my blazer that would capture everything said within 20 feet. Remember, Agent Chen said for the 10th time as we sat in the surveillance van a mile from Caroline's estate, you're a grateful victim, not a federal informant. You don't know anything about the broader operation, you've never heard of Caroline before yesterday, and you're just relieved that Richard's deception was discovered before he could steal your money. I nodded, checking my reflection in the van's mirror. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a conservative navy blazer, modest jewelry, and the kind of understated appearance that would reinforce Caroline's impression of me as a harmless widow. What if she has other people there? Daniel asked from his position at the monitoring equipment. Then Mrs. Thompson sticks to her story and gets out as quickly as possible, Agent Chen replied. This is reconnaissance, not a confrontation. The estate was impressive even from a distance, a sprawling colonial mansion set back from the road by a circular drive lined with mature oak trees. The kind of place that suggested old money and refined taste, which was probably exactly the image Caroline wanted to project. She's been living here for 3 years, Agent Chen explained. Bought it with cash under the name Caroline Westwood, though she's been using various aliases for different aspects of the operation. The property is registered as a private consulting firm for tax purposes. What kind of consulting? Officially, elder care planning and estate management. Unofficially, it's where she trains her operatives and plans their operations. I thought about Richard and Jessica, wondering how long they'd been coming to this house, learning how to identify and manipulate targets like me. Had they practiced their performances here? Refined their techniques for gaining trust and access? Mrs. Thompson, Agent Chen said, it's time. The drive to Caroline's house took exactly 7 minutes. Enough time for my nerves to transform from manageable anxiety to full-blown panic. I'd never done anything more dangerous than represent clients in small claims court. And now I was about to have dinner with someone who murdered people for a living. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing Caroline Voss in person for the first time. She was exactly as beautiful as her photos suggested. Silver hair swept into an elegant bun, kind eyes behind designer glasses, and the sort of warm grandmother smile that would make anyone trust her instantly. Margaret, she said, extending both hands to grasp mine. Thank you so much for coming. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. Please call me Maggie, I replied, allowing her to guide me into an foyer that probably cost more than my annual salary. And thank you for reaching out. I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Of course you are, dear. What Richard did was unconscionable. Caroline led me through a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Persian rugs, oil paintings, antique furniture that probably had historical significance. Everything about the place suggested refinement, culture, and the kind of wealth that comes from generations of good breeding. I hope you don't mind, Caroline said, as we entered a sitting room with a fireplace and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But I took the liberty of preparing your favorite wine. Richard mentioned that you enjoyed Pinot Grigio. She handed me a glass of wine that was probably worth more than my car payment. And I tried not to think about how much Richard had told this woman about my preferences, my habits, my vulnerabilities. He talked about me? Oh yes, dear. Richard spoke about you quite often. He seemed genuinely fond of you, which makes his behavior all the more puzzling. Caroline settled into an armchair across from me, and for a moment, this felt like a normal social visit. Two women having wine and conversation in a beautiful home. Except one of us was wearing a wire and the other was a professional killer. I keep wondering if I missed obvious signs, I said, sticking to the script Agent Chen had drilled into me. Looking back, there were moments when something felt off, but I ignored my instincts. You mustn't blame yourself, Caroline said firmly. Men like Richard are experts at manipulation. They study their targets, learn exactly what to say and do to gain trust. You were grieving, vulnerable, and he exploited that ruthlessly. The sympathy in her voice sounded genuine, which made this conversation even more surreal. This woman was comforting me for being victimized by her own employee. Did you know Richard well? We've been friends for several years. He came highly recommended by mutual acquaintances in the financial consulting world. Caroline sipped her wine and studied my face carefully. I had no idea he was involved in anything dishonest, Maggie. I'm as shocked as you are. The FBI agent said he'd been doing this for years, targeting other women. Yes, I heard that too. Apparently, there was quite an extensive investigation. Caroline's tone remained sympathetic, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. I hope you weren't too traumatized by all the legal proceedings. It happened so fast. One minute I was watching my son get married, and the next minute there were federal agents arresting people. I still don't understand how it all fits together. What exactly did the FBI tell you about Richard's activities? There it was, the first real question, disguised as concerned inquiry. Caroline needed to know how much I knew about the operation. Just that he'd been targeting widows, trying to gain access to their finances. Something about forged documents and fake investments. I made sure to sound confused rather than knowledgeable. They said I was lucky that Daniel suspected something and started recording conversations. Your son sounds very protective. He's always looked out for me, especially since his father died. I think he was suspicious of Richard from the beginning, but he didn't want to hurt my feelings by saying anything. Caroline nodded as if this made perfect sense. And the young woman who was arrested with Richard, Jessica, was it? What was her involvement? I'm still trying to understand that part. Apparently, she was working with Richard somehow, but the FBI didn't give me many details. They said something about her targeting my son as part of the same scheme. How terrible for your family. To have your son's engagement turn out to be part of an elaborate fraud. I can't imagine. We talked for another 20 minutes about the trauma of discovering that people I'd trusted had been lying to me, about the difficulty of rebuilding trust after such a betrayal, about the importance of being cautious about new relationships. Caroline was the perfect sympathetic listener, asking just the right questions, offering just the right amount of comfort. And the whole time, I could feel her evaluating me, measuring my responses, trying to determine whether I was a threat to whatever remained of her operation. Maggie, she said finally, I want you to know that if you need anything, support, resources, even just someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to call me. I feel partially responsible for what happened to you, and I'd like to help however I can. That's very kind of you. I mean it. I have connections in the financial world, contacts who could help you review your accounts and make sure Richard didn't access anything he shouldn't have. I know several excellent attorneys who specialize in fraud recovery if you need legal assistance. The offer sounded generous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was another form of surveillance. Caroline wanted to stay connected to me, to monitor my activities and make sure I didn't discover anything else about her operation. I should probably stick with the FBI's recommendations for now, I said carefully. They seem to have everything under control. Of course. But if that changes, please remember that you have options. Caroline walked me to the door, and as I prepared to leave, she placed a gentle hand on my arm. Maggie, there's one more thing. The FBI investigation. Do you know if it's ongoing? I'm concerned that there might be other victims out there who need help. And there was the real question she'd been building toward all evening. Caroline needed to know whether law enforcement was still actively investigating her network. I think they arrested everyone who was involved, I said, maintaining my confused victim persona. At least, that's what Agent Chen implied. She said the case was pretty much closed now that they had Richard and Jessica. Caroline's smile was warm and reassuring, but I caught a flash of something else in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or calculation. Well, that's good news. I'm sure everyone involved just wants to put this behind them and move on. As I drove away from the estate, I could see Caroline watching from her front window, and I wondered if I'd just convinced her that I was harmless or given her enough information to decide that I needed to be eliminated. The tracking device in my earring was still working. I could see Agent Chen's van following at a discreet distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong with this operation. Caroline Voss was too smart, too careful, too professional to have revealed anything useful during our conversation. If anything, I'd probably given her more information than she'd given me. And as I replayed our conversation in my mind, I realized that she'd asked very specific questions about the FBI investigation, questions that suggested she was planning something. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had been contacting me. Well done. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. But this time, the message was signed. C. Caroline Voss had been testing me tonight, and apparently, I'd passed. The question was, passed for what? She knows, I said the moment I walked into the surveillance van. Caroline knows I'm working with you. Agent Chen looked up from her monitoring equipment, frowning. What makes you think that? The text message, and the way she asked about the investigation. She wasn't trying to find out how much I knew. She was testing whether I'd tell you the truth about our conversation. I showed them my phone with Caroline's latest message. Daniel read it over my shoulder, and his face went pale. Phase 2, he said. Phase 2 of what? Agent Chen was already on her radio, calling for backup units to monitor Caroline's property. Mrs. Thompson, tell me exactly what happened in there, every detail, every question, every moment that felt off. As I recounted the entire conversation, Agent Chen's expression grew increasingly grim. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and ran her hands through her hair. You're right, she admitted. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was Caroline recruiting you. Recruiting me for what? Think about it from her perspective. Her operation just got exposed. Her best operatives are in federal custody, and she needs to rebuild. But she also needs to know whether law enforcement is still investigating her network. Daniel was pacing in the small confines of the van. So she invites my mother to dinner, makes her feel safe and sympathetic, then offers to help her with financial and legal resources. Resources that would give Caroline access to information about the FBI investigation, Agent Chen confirmed. And if Mrs. Thompson had accepted that help, Caroline would have had a direct line to everything we know about her operation. I felt sick as I realized how close I'd come to walking into an even bigger trap. The attorneys and financial consultants she offered to connect me with, they're part of her network. Almost certainly. Caroline was offering to surround you with people who could monitor your activities, influence your decisions, and potentially set you up for the same fate as her previous victims. But I didn't accept her help. I said I'd stick with the FBI's recommendations, which told her that you're still in contact with law enforcement and potentially useful as a source of information about our investigation. The van had grown crowded as additional agents arrived to monitor the situation. Agent Chen pulled up tactical maps on her tablet, showing Caroline's property and the surrounding area. The good news, she said, is that Caroline apparently believes Mrs. Thompson can be turned. The bad news is that she's going to escalate her efforts to recruit her, which puts everyone at greater risk. What does Phase 2 mean? I asked. Unknown. But based on Caroline's previous behavior, it probably involves either eliminating Mrs. Thompson as a threat or fully recruiting her as an asset. Either way, it's going to happen fast. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Caroline. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Riverfront Park, Northeast Bench. Come alone. Time to discuss your future. Agent Chen read the message and immediately started coordinating with her team. This is moving faster than we anticipated. Caroline's rushing the timeline, which suggests she's planning to disappear soon. Or planning to eliminate loose ends, Daniel added grimly. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand something. This meetup tomorrow is exponentially more dangerous than tonight's dinner. Caroline's not going to be playing the sympathetic friend anymore. She's going to make you an offer, and your response will determine whether you live or die. The weight of that statement settled over me like a lead blanket. What kind of offer? Money, probably. A lot of money, in exchange for information about the FBI investigation. She'll position it as payment for the trauma Richard caused you, but really, she'll be buying your cooperation. And if I refuse, then you become a liability instead of an asset. Agent Chen showed me more photos on her tablet, surveillance images of Caroline's previous victims. These people all had the opportunity to cooperate with Caroline's operation. The ones who said yes lived, the ones who said no didn't. I studied the photos, trying to imagine myself in their position. What would I have done if Caroline had approached me before I knew what she was? Before Daniel had exposed Richard and Jessica? Would I have been grateful for her help? Would I have accepted her money and unknowingly become part of a criminal network? There's something else, Agent Chen said, her tone suggesting I wasn't going to like this next revelation. Our surveillance team has been monitoring electronic communications from Caroline's estate. She's been in contact with at least 3 other operatives who weren't arrested today. More people like Richard and Jessica? Worse. These are the cleanup crew, specialists who handle problems that can't be solved through manipulation or fraud. We believe they're already in Portland. Daniel sat down heavily in one of the van's chairs. You're talking about assassins. Professional killers who specialize in making murders look like accidents. Caroline has used them before, when victims became too suspicious or law enforcement got too close. I thought about the crime scene photos Agent Chen had shown me earlier. The elderly man who'd supposedly fallen downstairs. The woman whose brake lines had been cut. These hadn't been spur-of-the-moment crimes. They'd been carefully planned and executed by experts. So tomorrow, when I meet with Caroline, these people will be watching. Almost certainly, if Caroline decides you can't be recruited, they'll be ready to implement a permanent solution. The van was silent, except for the crackling of radio communications as agents coordinated surveillance positions around the city. I realized that this operation had grown far beyond a simple sting to catch con artists. We were now dealing with what amounted to an organized crime syndicate that had been operating for years. Agent Chen, I said finally, what are my real options here? Option 1. We cancel tomorrow's meeting. Put you in witness protection and hope Caroline's network eventually makes a mistake that allows us to locate and arrest them. What's option 2? You meet with Caroline tomorrow, we record whatever offer she makes and hope we can use that evidence to build a case against the broader network. And option 3? Agent Chen hesitated. Option 3 is that you appear to accept Caroline's offer and work as a double agent to gather evidence from inside her operation. The suggestion hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Daniel immediately started shaking his head. Absolutely not. That's not an option. Mr. Thompson, your mother may be our only chance to stop these people. Caroline's network has been operating for years, and without inside access, we may never get enough evidence to shut them down permanently. You're asking her to become a criminal, to take money from murderers and pretend to cooperate with their operation. I'm asking her to help us save other families from going through what yours just experienced. I thought about Mrs. Morrison, recognizing Richard from her sister's case, about the crime scene photos of Caroline's victims, about all the families who had trusted the wrong people and paid for that trust with their lives. If I accepted Caroline's offer tomorrow, how long would I have to maintain the deception? Unknown. Weeks, possibly months. Long enough to document the network structure, identify the other operatives, and gather evidence of their crimes. During which time, I'd be surrounded by people who would kill me without hesitation if they suspected I was working with law enforcement. Yes, Daniel stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're asking my mother to risk her life for an investigation that should be handled by professional undercover agents. Mr. Thompson, Caroline specifically requested to meet with your mother. She won't trust anyone else, and she's too paranoid to allow strangers into her inner circle. Mrs. Thompson is our only way in. I looked at my son, this man who had already risked so much to protect me, and realized that maybe it was time for me to risk something to protect other people's families. Agent Chen, if I agree to do this, what kind of support would I have? 24-hour surveillance, emergency extraction procedures, and direct communication access whenever you're not actively with Caroline's people. And if something goes wrong, then we come in immediately, regardless of the consequences for the broader investigation. I thought about Tom, about the promise I'd made to him not to let anyone take advantage of me. But I also thought about his other promise, that if someone tried to hurt our family, I shouldn't just protect myself. I should make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. "I'll do it," I said quietly. Daniel's face went white. "Mom, please." "I'll do it," I repeated, louder this time. "But I want Daniel involved in every aspect of the surveillance and communication. If I'm going to risk my life, I want my son watching my back." Agent Chen nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." As we spent the rest of the night planning tomorrow's meeting and my potential infiltration of Caroline's network, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial about this operation. Caroline Voss was too smart to trust a stranger this quickly, too careful to reveal her network to someone she'd just met, which meant either she was getting desperate or she knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. And at 3 a.m., as we finalized the details of tomorrow's meeting, I realized what had been bothering me about this entire situation. Caroline hadn't just known about my wine preferences because Richard told her. She'd known things about me that Richard would never have learned in 3 months of dating, which meant she'd been watching me long before Richard ever approached me in that bookstore. The revelation hit me like cold water in the face. "Agent Chen," I said, interrupting her briefing on tomorrow's surveillance protocols. "Caroline's been planning this for longer than 3 months." "What do you mean?" "The things she knew about me tonight, my wine preference, my routines, details about my relationship with Daniel. Richard couldn't have learned all of that in 3 months of casual dating." Agent Chen looked up from her tactical planning documents. "How long do you think she's been watching you?" "I think she's been watching me since Tom died." The van went silent except for the low hum of electronic equipment. Agent Chen pulled up a new screen on her tablet, showing a timeline of my husband's death and the investigation that followed. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband died of a heart attack 2 years ago. Are you suggesting that Caroline's network has been planning to target you for that long?" I thought back to those early months of grief, when I'd been too overwhelmed to pay attention to anything beyond basic survival. Had there been signs that I'd missed? People who'd seemed too helpful, too interested in my situation? "Tom's funeral," I said suddenly. There were people there I didn't recognize, people who claimed to be business associates or distant relatives. I was too grief-stricken to question it, but now, Daniel was scrolling through his phone, looking for something. "Mom, remember that woman who kept calling you after the funeral? The one who said she was from Dad's insurance company?" "Elizabeth Martinez," I said, the memory coming back clearly. "She called for weeks, asking about paperwork, policy details, whether I needed help managing the payout." Agent Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet. "We need to pull records of everyone who contacted you after your husband's death. If Caroline's network has been planning this for 2 years, there will be a trail. It would explain why Richard seemed to know so much about me when we met," I realized. Our conversation in the bookstore felt natural, but he knew exactly what books I liked, exactly what would appeal to me, because Caroline had been having you watched and profiled for months before Richard ever approached you, Daniel said grimly. Agent Chen's radio crackled with a communication from the surveillance team monitoring Caroline's estate. "Control, this is Unit 7. We have multiple vehicles arriving at the target location. At least 6 individuals, possibly more. Copy that, Unit 7. Maintain visual surveillance." Agent Chen looked at me with concern. "Caroline's assembling her team. Whatever she's planning for tomorrow, it's bigger than just a recruitment meeting." My phone buzzed with another message. "Bring your son tomorrow. We need to discuss the future of your entire family." The words made my blood run cold. Caroline wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was threatening Daniel. "That's it," Daniel said, reading the message over my shoulder. "I'm not letting you meet with her." "Daniel." "No." "Mom, she just threatened me to manipulate you. That's exactly what a predator does when their initial approach isn't working." Agent Chen was coordinating with her team, adjusting surveillance positions and calling for additional backup. "Mrs. Thompson, this changes everything. Caroline's escalating much faster than we anticipated." "What does that mean?" "It means she's either desperate or confident enough in her position to take bigger risks. Either way, it makes tomorrow exponentially more dangerous." I looked around the van at all the federal agents, surveillance equipment, and tactical planning documents, and realized that I'd somehow become the center of a major law enforcement operation. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was whether to start dating again. Now I was being asked to infiltrate a criminal organization that had been planning my death for 2 years. Agent Chen, I need to know something. If this network has been watching me for 2 years, why didn't they just kill me immediately after Tom died? Why the elaborate con with Richard and Jessica? Because murder investigations draw attention, especially when the victim has life insurance or inheritance money. It's much cleaner to gain legal access to someone's assets through marriage or financial fraud, then eliminate them if necessary. But they were planning to kill me eventually. Almost certainly. Once Richard had access to your accounts and legal authority over your affairs, you would have become a liability. The scope of the deception was staggering. Not just Richard and Jessica, but an entire network of people who'd been planning and orchestrating my death for 2 years. People who'd attended Tom's funeral, called about insurance paperwork, perhaps even influenced decisions I'd made about my finances and living situation. How many other people are they targeting right now? I asked. Unknown, potentially dozens. Caroline's network was operating in at least 3 states, with active operations in multiple cities. Daniel was studying the surveillance reports from Caroline's estate. Agent Chen, this list of vehicles arriving at her property, some of these license plates are registered in different states, which confirms that Caroline is bringing in her entire network for whatever she's planning tomorrow. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call, not a text. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. Agent Chen nodded, and I answered the call while she monitored the conversation. Maggie. Caroline's voice was warm and friendly, exactly as it had been during dinner. I hope I didn't alarm you with that last message. I realize it might have sounded more dramatic than intended. I was a bit surprised, I admitted. I should have been clearer. When I said we need to discuss your family's future, I meant that I have some opportunities that might benefit both you and Daniel. But they're the kind of opportunities that require careful consideration and complete discretion. What kind of opportunities? The kind that could solve your financial concerns permanently. Maggie, you're a widow living on a paralegal's salary, and Daniel's just starting his career. I'm in a position to offer you both security and independence. Caroline was making her pitch, and Agent Chen was recording every word. That sounds too good to be true, I said carefully. I understand your skepticism, especially after what Richard did. But I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to listen to a business proposition that could change your life. What would this proposition involve? Information, Maggie. You have access to details about the FBI investigation that would be valuable to people who want to avoid similar problems in the future. I'm prepared to pay very well for that information. There it was, Caroline's offer. Money in exchange for betraying the FBI investigation. How well? $2 million, transferred immediately to accounts of your choosing, plus ongoing compensation for future cooperation. The amount was staggering. $2 million for information that could help Caroline's network avoid prosecution and continue targeting other families. Caroline, I need to think about this. Of course you do. But Maggie, I want you to understand something important. This offer has an expiration date. After tomorrow's meeting, the opportunity disappears permanently. The threat was subtle but clear. Accept Caroline's offer or face the consequences. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I said. Wonderful. And Maggie? Bring Daniel. I think he'll find my proposal very educational. After I hung up, the van was silent for a long moment. Agent Chen was reviewing the recording, making notes about Caroline's exact words and the implications of her offer. $2 million, Daniel said finally. She's serious about this. Caroline Voss doesn't make casual offers, Agent Chen confirmed. She's investing serious money because she believes Mrs. Thompson can deliver valuable information. Information that would help her network avoid prosecution and continue killing people. Exactly. I thought about the number Caroline had mentioned. $2 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to completely change my life and Daniel's future. For a moment, I could see the appeal. Take the money, disappear, start over somewhere safe and comfortable. But then I thought about Mrs. Morrison, still grieving her sister's suspicious death, about the families in those crime scene photos, about all the future victims who would die if Caroline's network continued operating. Agent Chen, I said, what happens if I appear to accept Caroline's offer tomorrow? Then you become our inside source for one of the most sophisticated elder fraud operations we've ever encountered, and you help us save lives. And if something goes wrong, Then we extract you immediately and hope we've gathered enough evidence to prosecute the people we can identify. Daniel grabbed my hand. Mom, whatever you decide, I support you. But I want you to know that we don't need Caroline's money. We'll be fine without it. I squeezed his hand back. I know we will, sweetheart. But other families won't be fine if we don't stop these people. As Agent Chen coordinated with her team for tomorrow's operation, I realized that I'd already made my decision. Caroline Voss had been planning my death for 2 years, had attended my husband's funeral while calculating how to profit from my grief. Tomorrow, at Riverfront Park, I was going to give her the performance of her life, and then I was going to help the FBI destroy her entire operation. Riverfront Park at 2 p.m. was crowded with joggers, families, and people enjoying the unusually warm November afternoon. I sat on the designated bench wearing a jacket with 3 different recording devices and trying to look like a nervous widow considering a criminal proposition instead of a federal informant about to take down a murder conspiracy. Daniel was positioned 50 yards away at a hot dog cart, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to maintain the illusion that I'd come alone. Agent Chen and her team were scattered throughout the park, disguised as maintenance workers, joggers, and park visitors. Caroline arrived exactly on time, looking like someone's elegant grandmother out for an afternoon stroll. She wore a pale blue cardigan, comfortable walking shoes, and carried a small handbag that probably contained enough evidence to put her away for life. "Maggie," she said warmly, settling onto the bench beside me. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." "It's been a strange few days," I replied, sticking to the script we'd rehearsed. "I'm still trying to process everything that's happened." "Of course you are. Having your trust violated so completely would shake anyone's faith in their judgment." Caroline opened her handbag and pulled out what looked like a financial statement. "I want to show you something that might help put yesterday's conversation in perspective." The document she handed me was a portfolio summary showing assets worth over $15 million, all held in accounts under various names. This represents just a portion of the resources available to people who understand how to navigate complex financial situations. I don't understand. Maggie? The world is full of people who make money by providing information to those who need it. Corporate executives sell insider trading tips. Government employees share classified intelligence. Even law enforcement officers occasionally find ways to monetize their access to sensitive information. Caroline was explaining the criminal marketplace for information, positioning it as a normal business transaction rather than a betrayal of law enforcement. "You're talking about corruption. I'm talking about pragmatism. You have access to information about an FBI investigation that could be valuable to people who want to avoid similar problems. I'm prepared to compensate you fairly for that access. $2 million. As a starting point, yes. But Maggie, this could be the beginning of a much more profitable relationship." Caroline pulled out another document, what appeared to be a bank routing number and account information. "This account currently contains exactly $2 million. If you provide me with details about the FBI's investigation into Richard and Jessica's operation, the money transfers to accounts of your choosing within 24 hours. I stared at the paper, trying to look tempted rather than disgusted. "What kind of details?" "Names of other people they're investigating, information about evidence they've collected, details about ongoing surveillance or planned arrests." "I don't know most of that information, but you could find out. Agent Chen trusts you, considers you a victim rather than a suspect. She would share information if you asked the right questions." Caroline's plan was more sophisticated than I'd expected. She wasn't asking me to steal classified files or hack into FBI databases. She was asking me to exploit Agent Chen's trust and sympathy to gather intelligence about the investigation. "What makes you think I would do something like this?" Caroline's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Maggie, you've spent 2 years struggling financially since your husband died. You work as a paralegal, live paycheck to paycheck, and worry constantly about your future security. Meanwhile, the people who victimized you will spend a few years in minimum security prison, then get released to comfortable lives funded by money they stole from previous victims." The truth of her words stung, even though I knew she was manipulating me. I had been struggling financially. I was worried about my future. And the idea that Richard and Jessica would eventually be released to enjoy money they'd stolen from other victims was genuinely infuriating. Richard and Jessica are going to prison. For 5 to 7 years, maximum. Then they'll be free to enjoy the millions they've hidden in offshore accounts while their victims remain poor, traumatized, and forgotten. Caroline leaned closer, her voice taking on a confidential tone. But you have the opportunity to change that dynamic. Take control of your situation, secure your future, and ensure that you're the one who profits rather than the one who suffers. By betraying the investigation, by protecting your own interests for once in your life. I looked around the park, seeing families enjoying the afternoon, children playing on swings, couples walking hand in hand, normal people living normal lives, unaware that they were surrounded by federal agents conducting a criminal takedown operation. Caroline, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been planning this? Her smile faltered slightly. Planning what? This conversation. This offer. How long have you been watching me? Caroline's expression became more careful. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you've been planning to target me since my husband died. I think Richard didn't meet me by accident in that bookstore. I think this entire operation has been in development for 2 years. For the first time since we'd met, Caroline looked genuinely surprised. She studied my face carefully, apparently reassessing her impression of me as a confused, harmless victim. That's a very perceptive observation, Maggie. It's not an observation. It's a fact. The question is whether you're going to admit it. Caroline sat back on the bench, and I could see her calculating whether to continue the pretense or acknowledge the truth. Finally, she smiled with what appeared to be genuine admiration. You're much smarter than we initially assessed. We? My organization has been tracking potential targets in the Pacific Northwest for several years. We identified you as a candidate shortly after your husband's death, but the timeline for approach was always intended to be longer. What changed? Your son. Daniel's suspicious nature and protective instincts made the operation more complicated than anticipated. We had to accelerate our timeline, which led to mistakes. Caroline was actually explaining their criminal methodology, apparently confident that I was either going to join their operation or die before I could report this conversation. So you've been watching me for 2 years. Gathering information, yes. Understanding your financial situation, your relationships, your vulnerabilities. We wanted to ensure that when we made our approach, it would be perfectly tailored to your specific circumstances. And if I hadn't met Richard in that bookstore, we had several other approaches planned: financial advisors, attorneys, even a potential romantic connection through a church or community organization. Richard's approach was simply the most efficient. The casual way Caroline discussed orchestrating my manipulation was chilling. These people had spent 2 years studying my life, planning my exploitation, and preparing my eventual murder. Caroline, I need to know something else. What's that? How many people has your organization killed? The question hung between us like a challenge. Caroline's expression became completely neutral, and for a moment, I saw the professional killer underneath the grandmother facade. That's not information I share with potential business partners. Even potential business partners who are considering risking their lives to help you? Caroline considered this for a long moment. 17, she said finally, over the past 5 years, all of them people who became obstacles to our operations. 17 murders. 17 families destroyed by this woman's greed and ruthlessness. And if I refuse your offer, then you become obstacle number 18. The threat was delivered in the same warm, conversational tone Caroline had been using throughout our meeting. She could have been discussing the weather or complimenting my jacket. I looked across the park and saw Daniel at the hot dog cart, trying to look casual while obviously watching our conversation. Agent Chen was positioned near the playground, disguised as a jogger stretching before a run. Caroline, I said quietly, I accept your offer. Her smile was radiant. I was hoping you'd say that. But I have conditions. Of course you do. What are they? I want half the money transferred immediately as a good faith gesture. The other half comes after I provide the information you want. That's reasonable. I want protection for my son. Daniel doesn't know anything about this arrangement, and I want to keep it that way. Also reasonable. And I want to meet the other people in your organization. If I'm risking my life to help you, I want to know who I'm working with. Caroline's expression became more cautious. That's a more significant request. It's a non-negotiable condition. I'm not walking into this blindly. Caroline pulled out her phone and sent a quick text message. Within minutes, she received a response. "Very well," she said. "Tonight, 8 p.m., I'll send you an address. You'll meet the core team and we'll discuss the operational details of our arrangement." What should I expect? Professional people who take security very seriously. Don't bring any recording devices. Don't tell anyone where you're going. And be prepared to demonstrate your commitment to our mutual success. Caroline stood up from the bench, looking every inch the pleasant grandmother I'd first met. "Maggie, welcome to the most profitable organization you've never heard of." After she left, I sat on the bench for another 10 minutes, watching families enjoy the park and trying to process the fact that I'd just committed to infiltrating a criminal organization responsible for 17 murders. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Outstanding work. We got everything." But as I walked back toward the surveillance van, I couldn't shake the feeling that Caroline had gotten everything she wanted too. Tonight, I was going to meet the core of her murder conspiracy, and I still had no idea how I was going to survive it. The address Caroline sent was for a warehouse in an industrial district 20 minutes outside Portland. Agent Chen and her team spent 4 hours conducting surveillance and planning the operation, but we all knew this was the most dangerous part of the entire investigation. "Caroline's bringing you to meet her core team," Agent Chen explained, as technicians fitted me with the most sophisticated recording equipment the FBI had available. "These are people who have been killing for years, who trust no one, and who will be extremely suspicious of any new addition to their operation. What's the plan if something goes wrong?" We breached the building immediately, but Mrs. Thompson, once you're inside that warehouse, you'll be surrounded by professional killers. If they suspect you're working with law enforcement, we may not be able to reach you in time. Daniel was pacing the surveillance van like a caged animal. For the past 6 hours, he'd been trying to convince me to cancel this operation, to let the FBI handle it with professional undercover agents. "Mom, it's not too late to walk away from this. Caroline already confessed to 17 murders. That's enough to arrest her." "It's not enough to stop the network," I replied. "We need to identify the other operatives, find evidence of their crimes, and shut down the entire operation." "Is it worth dying for?" I thought about Mrs. Morrison, still grieving her sister's suspicious death, about the families in Agent Chen's crime scene photos, about all the future victims who would die if Caroline's network continued operating. "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." The warehouse was exactly what you'd expect from a criminal meeting location. Isolated, windowless, with multiple exit routes and excellent acoustics for detecting approaching vehicles. Agent Chen's team was positioned around the perimeter, but once I walked through that door, I would be completely on my own. Caroline met me in the parking lot, wearing dark clothing and a serious expression that was very different from her friendly grandmother persona. "Maggie, before we go inside, I need to be clear about something. The people you're about to meet don't trust easily, and they don't forgive mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "Any indication that you're not completely committed to our organization. Any sign that you've shared information about this meeting with law enforcement. Any suggestion that you're here under false pretenses." Caroline led me toward a side entrance of the warehouse. "These people have been working together for years, and they've stayed free by being extremely careful about who they allow into their circle. Tonight, they're going to evaluate whether you're an asset or a liability." The interior of the warehouse had been converted into what looked like a corporate conference room. Long table, comfortable chairs, projection equipment, and enough security cameras to monitor every angle of the space. 5 people were already seated around the table, and they all looked like they could kill me without spilling their coffee. "Everyone," Caroline said, taking her place at the head of the table. "This is Margaret Thompson, the woman I told you about. Maggie, allow me to introduce my colleagues." She pointed to a man in his 40s with the kind of military bearing that suggested special forces training. "This is Marcus. He handles our operational security." Next was a woman in her 30s with cold eyes and expensive jewelry. "Linda manages our financial operations and target identification." An older man with scarred hands and a Russian accent was introduced as Victor, our problem resolution specialist. I didn't want to know what kinds of problems Victor specialized in resolving. The 4th person was younger, maybe early 20s, with the nervous energy of someone who handled electronic surveillance and communications. Tommy runs our technical operations. The final person at the table was a woman who looked like a corporate executive, perfectly styled hair, designer suit, and the kind of authoritative presence that suggested she was used to being in charge. And this is Susan, my business partner and co-founder of our organization. I took the empty chair they indicated, trying to project confidence while surrounded by people who had collectively murdered dozens of innocent victims. Maggie, Susan said, studying me carefully. Caroline tells us you have access to information about the FBI investigation into our Portland operation. That's correct. And you're willing to share that information in exchange for financial compensation. I am. Susan leaned forward. Before we proceed, I need you to understand something about our organization. We're not amateur criminals or opportunistic con artists. We're a professional operation that has been successfully targeting and eliminating threats for over a decade. I understand. Do you? Because the woman sitting across from you, Linda, has personally arranged the deaths of 6 people who became obstacles to our operations. Victor has eliminated 9. Marcus has handled 11. And I've personally killed more people than I care to count. The casual way Susan discussed murder was terrifying. These people weren't just criminals, they were predators who had turned killing into a business model. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand the consequences of betraying our trust. The FBI investigation that you're going to help us navigate represents an existential threat to our organization. If you help us successfully, you'll be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. If you betray us, Susan didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Caroline activated the projection equipment and displayed a detailed organizational chart showing the scope of their operation. Maggie, what you're looking at is a network that spans 12 states and generates approximately $50 million annually in revenue. The chart showed dozens of names, locations, and ongoing operations. This wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a sophisticated business enterprise built on fraud and murder. We currently have 37 active operatives working in various capacities, Caroline continued. Some focus on target identification and research, like Linda. Others handle approach and manipulation, like Richard. And some specialize in elimination when operations go wrong, like Victor. Victor smiled when Caroline mentioned his specialty, and I felt my blood run cold. The Portland operation was valuable to us, Susan explained, but it wasn't essential. We have similar operations running in Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, and Phoenix. However, the FBI investigation threatens all of our operations if it expands beyond the specific individuals they've already arrested. What do you need from me? Linda pulled out a tablet and showed me a list of questions. We need to know whether the FBI is planning additional arrests. We need identification of any undercover agents or informants who might be working within our network. And we need details about evidence they've collected that might implicate people other than Richard and Jessica. How am I supposed to get that information? Agent Chen trusts you, Caroline said. She sees you as a victim rather than a suspect. If you ask the right questions during your ongoing cooperation with their investigation, she'll share information. What if she gets suspicious? Then Victor handles the problem, Susan said matter-of-factly. I looked around the table at these 5 people who had built a criminal empire on the graves of innocent victims, and realized that I was looking at some of the most dangerous people in the country. I need to know something, I said carefully. How did you choose me as a target? Susan and Caroline exchanged glances. We maintain extensive databases of potential targets across multiple states. Widow women with significant life insurance payouts, minimal family connections, and limited financial sophistication. You've been planning this for 2 years. We've been planning variations of this for 5 years, Susan corrected. Your husband's death simply moved you from a potential target to an active operation. The scope of their planning was staggering. These people had been watching me, studying me, preparing to murder me for half a decade. Susan, I said, I want to propose a modification to our arrangement. What kind of modification? I want to become a permanent member of your organization. The table went silent. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Susan leaned back in her chair, and Victor's hand moved slightly closer to what was probably a weapon. Explain. I've been a paralegal for 15 years. I understand legal systems, document preparation, and financial procedures. I could be useful for more than just information about this one FBI investigation. Susan considered this for a long moment. What makes you think we need additional personnel? Because your Portland operation failed. Richard and Jessica made mistakes that exposed your network to federal investigation. I could help you develop better approaches, more sophisticated documentation, more convincing operational security. I was making this up as I went along, trying to convince a group of professional killers that I could be useful enough to keep alive long enough for the FBI to arrest them. Interesting proposition, Susan said, but joining our organization permanently requires a demonstration of commitment. What kind of demonstration? You would need to eliminate a threat to our operation. Personally, to prove that you're willing to do whatever is necessary to protect our mutual interests. My blood turned to ice water. They wanted me to murder someone. What kind of threat? Caroline pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. It showed Agent Chen leaving a federal building in downtown Portland. Agent Chen has become too interested in our organization. Her investigation threatens all of our operations, and she needs to be eliminated before she can cause additional damage. The woman who had risked her career to protect me, who had trusted me with sensitive information about a federal investigation, who had treated me like a partner rather than a victim. They wanted me to kill her. How would I? We have a plan, Marcus said, speaking for the first time. Agent Chen lives alone in a downtown apartment. She follows predictable routines, has minimal security awareness, and would never suspect an attack from someone she trusts. We would provide support, equipment, and extraction, Victor added. But you would need to handle the actual elimination personally. I stared at the photograph of Agent Chen, trying to process the fact that these people were calmly discussing her murder while asking me to participate. When? Tomorrow night, Susan said. Agent Chen typically returns home around 8 p.m. You would approach her in her apartment building's parking garage, gain access to her vehicle, and ensure that her drive home results in a fatal accident. They had been planning this assassination while I sat in their meeting, working out the operational details of murdering a federal agent. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course you do, Caroline replied. But Maggie, understand that this demonstration isn't optional. If you want to join our organization permanently, you need to prove that you're willing to protect it. And if I refuse, then you leave here tonight and never contact us again, Susan said. But you also never repeat anything you've heard in this room. The threat was implicit, but clear. Walk away and keep my mouth shut, or join their organization by murdering Agent Chen. I'll let you know tomorrow, I said. Excellent, Caroline replied. Tommy will provide you with communication devices and operational details. Marcus will brief you on security protocols, and Victor will ensure that you understand the consequences of making the wrong choice. As the meeting ended and I prepared to leave the warehouse, I realized that I'd just survived a meeting with some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. But I'd also gathered evidence that would allow the FBI to arrest all of them and shut down their entire network. The only question was whether I'd live long enough to deliver that evidence. As I drove away from the warehouse with recording devices full of confessions, operational details, and evidence of planned murders, my phone buzzed with a text message. But this time, it wasn't from Caroline or her network. It was from Agent Chen. Emergency. Meet at Safe House immediately. We have a problem. Epilogue. 6 months later. I sat in the witness box in federal court, looking directly at Caroline Voss as the prosecutor asked me to identify the woman who had orchestrated a criminal network responsible for 19 confirmed murders and millions of dollars in fraud. That's her, I said clearly. Caroline Voss, also known as Caroline Westwood, the leader of the criminal organization that targeted my family and dozens of other families across the Pacific Northwest. Caroline stared back at me with the same cold calculation she'd shown in that warehouse 6 months ago. Even in an orange prison jumpsuit, handcuffed and facing life in prison, she looked like she was still planning something. The trial had taken 4 months. The FBI had arrested 17 people based on evidence gathered during my infiltration of Caroline's network, including all 5 people from that warehouse meeting. The recordings I'd made had provided enough evidence to dismantle the entire organization and connect them to murders dating back over a decade. Richard Coleman and Jessica Hayes had plea bargained for reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against Caroline and her associates. They would each serve 12 years in federal prison. Not enough for what they'd done, but enough to keep them away from potential victims for a substantial period. Agent Chen had survived the assassination attempt that Caroline's network had been planning. The emergency that had called me to the safe house that night was actually the FBI moving to arrest the entire organization based on the recordings from the warehouse meeting. By the time Caroline's people arrived at Agent Chen's apartment building, federal agents were waiting for them. Daniel had been my strength through the entire trial process, sitting in the gallery every day, providing the emotional support I needed to relive the most terrifying experience of my life. He'd taken a leave of absence from his software job to make sure I had family support during the prosecution. "Mrs. Thompson," the prosecutor continued, "did the defendant ever explain to you how many people her organization had murdered?" "Yes," I replied. "She told me they had killed 17 people over 5 years, and that I would become number 18 if I refused to cooperate with their operation." The defense attorney had tried to argue that I'd been acting as an agent provocateur, that my presence had somehow induced Caroline's network to commit crimes they wouldn't have otherwise committed. The jury hadn't bought it. When you have recordings of people casually discussing 17 murders and planning the 18th, it's hard to argue entrapment. Mrs. Morrison had been in the courtroom gallery every day of the trial. The investigation had finally provided evidence connecting Caroline's network to her sister's death, giving her family the closure they'd been seeking for 3 years. After the trial ended and Caroline received 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, I walked out of the federal courthouse with Daniel and Agent Chen to find news crews waiting for interviews. "Mrs. Thompson," a reporter called out, "how does it feel to know that your courage helped shut down a criminal organization that had been operating for over a decade?" I thought about Tom, about the promise I'd made to him not to let anyone take advantage of me, about the other promise, to make sure that anyone who tried to hurt our family couldn't hurt anyone else's family either. "It feels like keeping a promise," I said simply. 6 months later, I was living a completely different life. The FBI had recommended me for a Civilian Service Award. A true crime podcast had featured my story, leading to speaking requests from law enforcement organizations around the country. A literary agent had contacted me about writing a book. But the most important change was personal. I'd discovered that I was braver than I'd ever imagined, stronger than I'd ever known, and capable of protecting not just my own family, but other families as well. Daniel and I had grown closer through the experience, bonded by shared danger and the knowledge that we'd helped stop killers who had been operating for years. He'd met someone new, a federal prosecutor named Sarah who had worked on Caroline's case and shared our commitment to justice. I'd also met someone new, though I was taking it very slowly. Dr. James Patterson was a forensic psychologist who had provided expert testimony during the trial. He understood the psychological impact of what I'd experienced and wasn't intimidated by the fact that I'd infiltrated a criminal organization and helped send 17 people to federal prison. But the most satisfying change was the work I'd started doing with victim advocacy groups. The experience of being targeted by Caroline's network had given me insight into how these predators operated and how potential victims could protect themselves. I'd helped 3 other families identify and escape similar operations in the past 6 months. As I sat in my home office, the same house where Richard Coleman had once planned my murder, working on a presentation for the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, my phone rang. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Agent Martinez with the FBI's Portland office. We have a situation that Agent Chen thought you might be able to help with." "What kind of situation?" "We've identified what appears to be another criminal network operating in the Seattle area, using methods very similar to Caroline Voss's organization. We think they might be copycats, or possibly former associates who weren't arrested with the others. How can I help?" "We'd like you to consult on the investigation, help us understand their operational methodology, and identify potential approaches for gathering evidence." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll be there tomorrow morning." Because the truth is, once you've stared down professional killers in a warehouse and lived to send them to prison, everything else feels manageable. And I'd made a promise, not just to Tom, but to myself and to all the families who deserve to be safe from predators like Caroline Voss. Some promises are too important to break, no matter how dangerous keeping them might be. As I hung up the phone and started planning my trip to Seattle, I realized that the quiet widow who had been so easily targeted by Richard Coleman was gone forever. In her place was someone who fought back, and I was just getting started. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.